Mr. and Mrs. Vanatoli and the Magic Pumpkin Seeds. Not far from here, in a place where the winds were gentle and the earth was good, lived a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Vanatoli. They were a hard-working couple who kept their pigs clean, the fences mended, and the corn in the fields growing straight and tall. But whenever Mrs. Vanatoli suggested they plant turnips and carrots or potatoes and peas, Mr. Vanatoli shook his head.
Pigs and corn, corn and pigs. That's what we know, and that's what we grow.
Mrs. Vanatoli dreamed of planting a garden of her own. When the spring catalogs arrived, she made a long list of all the things she wanted to grow.
Pigs and corn, corn and pigs, said Mr. Vanatoli. That's what we know, and that's what we grow.
One autumn evening, when the melon moon was high in the sky, Mr. Vanatoli came in from the mailbox carrying a seed catalog and a package of seeds. "Another catalog and a package of seeds this time of year? How strange," said Mrs. Vanatoli.
"Throw them away," said Mr. Vanatoli. "Pigs and corn, corn and pigs. That's what we know, and that's what we grow."
After a supper of steamy pork chops and tender yellow corn, Mrs. Vanatoli took out her garden plans. "If I had a garden," said Mrs. Vanatoli, "I'd plant hot chili peppers and cucumbers and sweet-smelling thyme."
"Pigs and corn,"
grumbled Mr. Vanatoli from behind his newspaper. Mrs. Vanatoli slipped the seed packet into her apron pocket. "I'd also plant these new seeds to see what would grow. Anything is possible."
"Not for us,"
said Mr. Vanatoli. He switched off his reading light and stomped upstairs to bed. Mrs. Vanatoli stepped outside to gaze up at the night sky. She listened to the whistling wind. Inside her pocket, the new packet of seeds jiggled and wiggled as if they were dancing. Then, because all things seemed possible, Mrs. Vanatoli slipped off her shoes. Underneath the smiling moon, Mrs. Vanatoli twirled around the gatepost and pirouetted through the grass. She danced through the cornfield and pranced past the dreaming pigs. When the wind turned into a breeze, Mrs. Vanatoli tiptoed off to bed. At breakfast, Mrs. Vanatoli reached into her pocket for the seeds. "Oh dear, they're gone," said Mrs. Vanatoli. "Now I'll never know what they could have been." Mr. Vanatoli trudged down the stairs and opened the door. Along the porch railing was a long green vine with 5 orange pumpkins. "What lovely pumpkins," said Mrs. Vanatoli. "I didn't know you planted pumpkins this year."
"I didn't," said Mr. Vanatoli. "I don't know anything about growing pumpkins. What will we do with them?"
"I'll make pumpkin pies and pumpkin cookies and pumpkin bread. The possibilities are endless," said Mrs. Vanatoli. The following day, the vine twisted across the front porch and wrapped around the doorway. Mr. Vanatoli picked 10 ripe pumpkins and took them to his wife. "Don't worry," said Mrs. Vanatoli. "I'll make pumpkin soup and pumpkin salad and pumpkin soufflé. The possibilities are endless." On the 3rd day, the vine twisted across the front porch, around the doorway, and over the farmhouse roof. Mr. Vanatoli gathered 20 round pumpkins and hurried to the kitchen. Mrs. Vanatoli blocked the door. "Absolutely not," she said. "No more cooking and baking. I have other chores to do."
"What will I do with all these pumpkins?" asked Mr. Vanatoli.
"We could give them to our friends down the road, the new family who live up the lane, or our neighbors over the hill. The possibilities are endless," said Mrs. Vanatoli. That afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Vanatoli traveled the countryside, visiting old friends and making new ones by giving away pumpkins. Mrs. Vanatoli brought along her catalogs and her garden plans. Neighbors suggested ways to fertilize the garden and plant a new type of beans. Children picked out watermelons and cantaloupes to grow.
Pigs and corn, corn and pigs. That's what we know, and that's what we grow,
said Mr. Vanatoli. The next morning, 40 ripe pumpkins grew on the vine.
What am I going to do with all these pumpkins?
asked Mr. Vanatoli. Mrs. Vanatoli pointed to her fall catalogs. It's almost Halloween, she said. Let's make some jack-o'-lanterns with happy faces and sad faces, funny faces and scary faces. The possibilities are endless. So the Vanatolis carved pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns. They put them in the windows, along the railings, over the doorways, and around the porch. They even put a jack-o'-lantern on top of the pigsty. The possibilities were endless. Then, because all things are possible, Mrs. Vanatoli stepped out of her shoes, and Mr. Vanatoli slipped off his heavy work boots and began to dance. They waltzed through the cornfields, promenaded past the pigs, and tangoed through the tall, wet grass.
Tonight, let's look at your garden plans and the plants on your list, whispered Mr. Vanatoli. Next year, we'll plant row after row, because whatever we dream of, I know we can grow.